So, on to Klingler. Karl Klingler began violin about the age of 5 with his father. It was 1897 that he moved to Berlin to study with Joseph Joachim at the academy that Joachim had founded, the Royal Academy of Music. In 4 short years, he was named the associate concertmaster of the Berlin Philharmonic. 2 years later, by 1903, he was teaching his own violin class at the Berlin Academy. And by 1910, had actually taken Joachim's position at the Academy as full professor. In fact, in many ways, Joachim was the successor of, in many ways, Klingler was the successor of Joseph Joachim. Took his position after Joachim passed away at the Academy. Klingler played for the last couple years in Joachim's quartet, which was by many accounts, or by all intents, the premier string quartet in Germany, if not Europe, for the end of the 19th century. And then Klingler started his own quartet, which lasted from Joachim's death to 1936, when the Nazis asked him to no longer play with a Jewish cellist, and he then quit. In fact, Professor Schoenfeld has several times told me the story of Joseph Goebbels, one of Hitler's right-hand men, approaching Klingler and saying, "Look, can't you find another cellist in all of Germany than Silberstein, your Jewish cellist?" And Klingler thought for a few minutes in his quiet manner, and then said that yes, he could. There was the other Jewish cellist in Germany that he could play with, much to, of course, Goebbels' frustration. But in that year, he under Nazi pressure, disbanded the quartet, and he also, that was the same year that he quit being at the Hochschule, at the Academy of Arts, for the same reason. When, under Nazi pressure, they had removed the bust of the Jewish Joseph Joachim, that he felt he could no longer teach at the institution. But he inherited not only some of Joachim's career, he inherited one of his Stradivarius violins, and certainly his sense of style, of romantic style, of the Germanic Brahmsian music. I have here, yes, the Joachim Quartet, succeeded by the Klingler Quartet. And I have here just a couple examples of Klingler's composition. And you can hear it's solidly Brahmsian in its romanticness. From his sonata for violin and piano, and a bit of the second theme. And again, conservative in harmony, but very, very lush, and certainly of the Brahmsian as opposed to Wagner and Liszt camp of romantic music at the time. In fact, Schoenfeld has told me of performing one of his songs that he wrote for voice and piano, that he also included that it could be a violin part, that it could be done for violin, and she performed with orchestra on the Munich radio. O Stille dies Verlangen. certainly a wonderful sense of line and of melody. So when we come to his Introduction und Ciccone for violin line, the solo introduction in Ciccone, a few things stand out. In comparison to all the Ciccones previous, this is the first, it's the first I've ever seen to have an introduction, which perhaps speaks to how Bach had 4 movements of introduction to his, and so to give some sort of setup to such a grand piece as a Ciccone. But here, if we look at the difference between those core units of what makes a Ciccone, the bass line or harmony that repeats over and over, we see in comparison to Bach that is very simple. Klingler's takes a lot more departure. Taking 8 measures instead of 4 to work his way back to 1, back to the tonal harmony, or the tonal center, and weaving through a much more chromaticism. I believe it's as an attempt, or as part of the feeling to make a grand work, one that is able to explore more of the technical capabilities of the violin, and as a response to the increasing chromaticism and dissonance in compositions of the day. Here's a couple examples of Ciccones written around the same time. In the early 20th century, Richard Barth, another violinist, another student of Joseph Joachim's, interestingly a left-handed violinist. I would have enjoyed seeing that. And Max Reger, who's a well-known composer, in fact, one that Klingler would often play in his quartets and record. But I'll just play a couple short sections, and you can hear the change in harmony from Bach, which you just heard many times, to Barth, which is still relatively conservative. To something decidedly more chromatic, such as Max Reger. And these are a reduction of the harmonies most core throughout their Ciccone works. Almost hear him having to steer the ship back to return to 1 and set up for the next 8 bars. And very much reflecting then the more progressiveness, I think, of Reger. We hear Klingler in his harmonies also going these different directions. Certainly tonal, certainly coming back to 5-1, but having more fun in the journey. And to look at just a few examples of how Klingler does mimic Bach in his violin writing. So we saw how Bach used multiple voices dancing between. In Klingler we see much the same. letting each voice come out one by one. Or just as Bach uses lots of flourishes and sixteenths, as you heard many times, Klingler also, you'll see a number of examples of almost mirroring the rise and fall of the same type of lines that Bach uses. And finally, the using a register and rhythm to bring out the roles of different voices. Whereas Bach uses something like Klingler will have that same idea in something like his own harmonic language, but again, using the same violinistic techniques. And just a couple examples of features that I find unique to Klingler and that I enjoy. His use of trills and alternating notes in sections such as this. Or even his grouping things in irregular groups to get a sense of losing the beats or losing the clarity of beats the three beats while coming back. He certainly retains the minor mode, the same form of minor, major, minor, obviously the grandiosity, but you can see, I think you can hear throughout the weight of the mantle of Bach, or the role that he chose by taking on a work of this magnitude. Let's hear it. The full introduction and Chaconne.